Hello and welcome to another edition of Personal Health and Fitness. I'm your host, Chad Marshak. My program today is entitled Bulletproof Your Hamstrings. Hamstrings are a really important muscle group in your body, and oftentimes people don't understand how to train them properly. The hamstrings do two things primarily. They flex the knee, which is this, okay, and they extend the hip, which is whenever your leg comes behind you like so, or if you're going to bend over to pick something up, that would be considered hip extension. So with that in mind, you need to train your hamstrings accordingly. And most people, when they're exercising in a health club, are only aware of one exercise to train their hamstring, typically. And that exercise is the lying leg curl. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, you would lie face down on a leg curl apparatus, stomach down, face down, feet, you place your heels up against a pad and you curl your heel into your butt. That's strictly a leg flexion exercise or knee flexion exercise. Another exercise that you see in the health clubs is if you're seated in a machine, a seated leg curl where your legs are extended out in front of you, your heels are on top of a pad, and you draw your heels in towards your butt. That's another knee flexion exercise. There are tons more exercises that you need to do for your hamstrings. I would consider those two particular exercises way down on the list as far as good, beneficial, not only functional exercises, but exercises that are really going to strengthen your hamstrings, which kind of tie into your glute complex accordingly. So I'm going to demonstrate several exercises that you should typically do, incorporate into your hamstring training program, and also some corrective exercises that are going to help stretch your hamstrings properly. A lot of people sustain hamstring injuries in sport and physical activity because typically their muscles are too tight, all right? And so how do you stretch your hamstrings properly? That's another question a lot of people have for me, and usually I'm able to give them several ideas. So the first exercise we're going to demonstrate today is a glute ham raise, and I'm going to bring a partner on to help me demonstrate this exercise. There are actually glute ham raise machines that you find in some health clubs around the country. Great devices if used properly. I know in a lot of collegiate athletic training facilities, typically in their strength and conditioning program, that's a common apparatus that you're going to find there. Really, really great exercise to help strengthen your hamstrings. So if you don't have access to that piece of equipment, you can also use the floor and do a glute ham raise. Now we have an RX pad, and what Henry's going to do, he's going to kneel on the RX pad. If you have a cushioned surface, or you can take a rolled up towel, place it beneath your knees. That's really important that you're elevated slightly from the ground. We're up about 3-4 inches here off the ground here. You need a partner for this. If you don't have a partner, you can actually place something over your heels. You just don't want your heels to fly up. So you want to make sure that your heels are in a stable position, that they don't leave the floor. A partner is kind of the best way to go about doing this because you can press into your the person doing the exercise Achilles tendon area here to hold their legs down. Henry's going to take his hands and he's going to place them up to his chest. And what Henry's going to do is he's going to slowly lower his body weight, trying to keep a straight line through his spine all the way to the floor. And this is a really good exercise to train your hamstrings, which act as a decelerator to slow momentum. All right? So I'm going to press here. And slowly Henry's going to lower his body. Now you're going to see as Henry gets down to the ground, he may actually fall because his hamstrings have kind of lost their strength there. He's not strong enough to completely go all the way down to the ground. Now some people are so strong they can actually lower their body down to the ground and come back up. But those people are few and far between. And typically on this, I don't like to do any more than say 4 to 6 reps because it is such a difficult exercise. But Henry's doing a good job keeping a nice straight spine. His shoulders and his hips are aligned with each other as he goes down to the ground. And that's it. Good, Henry. And again, this really works on the hamstrings as they decelerate the body going down. So your hamstrings are really eccentrically loaded as your torso goes down towards the floor. That means they're lengthening, all right? And that's so important with training your hamstrings that you need to lengthen them. A lot of these exercises I'm going to teach you today, it's about lengthening your hamstrings and strengthening them in that particular movement pattern. Whereas if you're lying on a bench, doing a lying leg curl or a seated leg curl, that's more focused on shortening the musculature in the hamstring, which comprises 3 muscles in the back of your leg. Thank you, Henry. Appreciate it. So the next exercise I'm going to demonstrate is called a split stance Romanian deadlift, or a split stance RDL. Now, as far as the rep scheme on a lot of these exercises, it really depends on your ability, your level of fitness. But for example, on the first exercise that I just demonstrated, the glute ham raise, it's usually lower reps where you're going to do, again, anywhere between 4 and 6, as high as 8 for some people, unless you're exceptionally strong. But most people, that's going to be very difficult. I would consider that an advanced exercise. This next exercise, the split stance RDL, is for anyone. All right, so you can modify the load. You don't have to use heavy weights. I'm holding 15-pound dumbbells. For somebody who's exceptionally strong, because this is more or less what I would consider a unilateral exercise, which means one leg at a time. It's almost like twice the load. So I'm holding 30 pounds in my hand, but if you're using 2 legs, it would be similar to using 60 pounds. Likened to that anyway. So I'm going to hold the dumbbells out in front. My trailing foot, really important to get that trailing foot up in the air where I'm on my toes, my heels up in the air. I'm going to slightly unlock my forward knee as I bend forward and reach the weights down towards the ground, and then I'm going to stand up. Now, if you look at my spine angle, my spine is fairly straight. I'm not hunched and rounded like this, but I've got a nice straight spine angle as I reach down. Now, for some of you who are really tight here in the upper hamstring, this is going to be a challenge. So if that's the case, then modify how much you decide to flex your spine. You may only be able to go down this far before you feel a really big stretch in your hamstrings. That's okay. Then stand up. Go to your end range, find your range of motion, and work within it. If you've got really flexible hamstrings, like myself, I have normal range of motion, I can almost get down to the ground. But if you notice my tempo, nice and even. And usually if I'm doing this exercise, I'll keep my reps somewhere between 12 and 15 before I decide to switch sides. So I'm going to go for at this angle, kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. And again, trailing foot, really important, up on your toes. So make sure you've got good distance between your feet. And usually when I'm setting up, I try to align my feet with my hips. All right? I don't want to stand like so, where I'm on a tightrope where I don't have good balance. You want to make sure you have good balance and stability before you start this exercise. And again, that's the split stance RDL. RDL stands for Romanian deadlift. Okay, the next exercise I'm going to demonstrate is a barbell Romanian deadlift, or a barbell RDL. You can also use dumbbells. Now, I just demonstrated this exercise in a split stance method, but now my feet are positioned in a parallel stance position. I like to place my feet directly underneath my hips with my toes pointed straight ahead. So I'm going to take a grip width about shoulder width or so. It's important when you're doing any type of an extension, what I consider a hip extension exercise, like this exercise, the one I just demonstrated, is that you need to drive your hips back slightly, especially on this one with my feet positioned like so. So I want to push my butt back as I go down. I'm going to slightly unlock my knees because this isn't a stiff-legged deadlift. This is an actual Romanian deadlift. So unlock your knees ever so slightly. Spine is straight, and I try to keep my head in alignment with my upper back, my thoracic spine. So I'm not looking up, if you notice, like this when I go down, but my head's going to go along at the same angle as the rest of my spine. And push your butt back. Now you can vary the position of the bar. For example, true Romanian deadlift, usually the bar is going to slide down your shins and your knees, over your knees, and then down your shins, all right? I like to actually tweak my hand position, or my shoulder position, and I'll let the bar drift out in front of me ever so slightly as I drive my hips back. And that's going to give me, personally, a little bit different stretch. So depending on your level of flexibility in your hamstrings is going to dictate where you hold the bar. So again, you may have the bar close to your thighs or maybe slightly, away from your thighs as you go down. But again, the key is try to keep your weight distributed through your heels as you go down and come up. You're going to push through your heels as you lift your shoulders towards the ceiling. And again, the weight that you use, depending on your level of fitness, usually I'll have, for this particular exercise, the barbell RDL. If I'm not a power lifter, I'm going to do typically higher reps, so anywhere between 8 and 15. So adjust the weight accordingly, all right? If you're new to that, use a very light load. You can also use dumbbells if you don't have a barbell. You simply do it the same exact way. Pushing your butt back, unlocking your knees. The cool thing about dumbbells is that compared to an Olympic barbell, which weighs 45 pounds, you can go all the way down to 3 pounds, 2 pounds, 1 pound dumbbells. So it doesn't really matter. The next exercise I'm going to demonstrate is a Teeter Totter. Now this is similar to the Romanian deadlift, except balance comes into play. And balance is a really big component to fitness and health. Stability through the hip is really going to be affected by balancing on one leg at a time. Okay, and when I do this exercise, I'm going to set up on one leg. All right, I'm going to balance on my left foot. My right foot is free floating. And as I go down, just like in the Romanian deadlift, I'm going to unlock this knee, the stabilizing leg, as I go down. And I'm going to keep my head in alignment with my shoulders as I go down. All right? So you can see I'm kind of fighting it. And in the down position, my leg is straight back behind me. Now when I come down, I can tap my foot or touch my foot to regain my composure on the ground if I want to. And if you've got really good balance, then just keep that foot free floating the entire rep scheme. So if I decide to do 10 to 15 reps, I'm going to let this leg float. Now what's cool about doing single leg is that my hip is really kicking in too. So your hips, your glutes, and your hamstrings, typically in human movement, they work together. Always in human movement, I should say. And then you're going to stand up. If you don't have good flexibility in your hamstrings and you can only go down, say to here, before you feel a real big pull in your hamstrings, that's fine. But usually on the Teeter Totter exercise, I like to keep my reps relatively high, anywhere between 12 and 15. And I'm usually slow and controlled the whole time, all right? If I lose my balance, then I can tap my foot on the ground, regain my composure, and continue. All right, the next exercise I'm going to demonstrate here is a leg curl done with a slide board. Now, if you don't have a slide board, which most people don't have a slide board, we can figure this out, all right? If you have either a hardwood floor, or if you have a laminate floor, or if you have a tile floor of some sort, you can also do this exercise, all right? And what I do, what I would recommend, if you have the tile floor, or the laminate floor, or a wood floor, is you take a towel, place the towel, rolled up towel, you can be a bath towel, and you're going to place it underneath your heels. Now I'm just using some slide board booties here. I'll demonstrate with an Eric's pad here in a second. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lie on my back. I'm going to lift my hips up after I'm pressing my hands into the floor. Now what's cool about this exercise, it does two things. I'm going to extend my hips and flex my knee. If you remember at the beginning of the program, I talked about what do the hamstrings do, and they do both of that. Hamstrings flex the knee and extend the hip. So this is kind of a two-for exercise. You're getting 2 for 1 here. So I'm extending my hips now, and then I'm going to flex my knees. I'm going to draw my heels into my butt, straighten them, then draw them back. Trying to keep my hips elevated the whole time. Again, great exercise that does both things that the hamstrings do. Flex the knee, extend the hips. So really good exercise for my glutes and hamstrings. If you notice my feet here, I'm really trying to pull my heels in. My feet aren't flat on the surface. My toes are pulled up towards my knees as I straighten my legs and pull my heels into my butt. All right? Anybody can do that. Again, hard surface of some sort with a towel, great. Now, if you want to ramp it up, you can. You can do this single leg action, all right? Single leg action just requires a little more strength and a lot more stability. So what you're going to do is you're going to elevate one leg up into the air. You're going to extend your hips. Same thing, pull your toe up towards your knee on the stabilizing leg. Straighten your leg, and then pull your heel in. This is a challenging movement. So hips up, straighten the leg. Now I'm fighting that because my hamstrings are really kicking pretty hard. But if you want a challenge for that particular exercise, you can do that one leg at a time. Some of you may feel your triceps really kicking in too because you're pressing firmly into the ground. Your lower back's going to kick in a little bit as well. So that's a great exercise if you really want to challenge yourself. And that's just what I call a slide board leg curl. Get this out of the way. And when we think about hamstrings and how important they are in human movement, you really need to consider that when you're running or cutting, if you have to stop suddenly, typically involves deceleration. If you have to make a cut, you have to decelerate, all right? And the hamstrings are really responsible for decelerating your body in human movement. So oftentimes, people sustain injuries because there's a strength ratio differential between the quadriceps in the front and the hamstrings in the back. Ideally, we want a 1-to-1 strength ratio. That means that your quadriceps should be as strong as your hamstrings, all right? Most typically, people's quadricep musculature is anywhere between 20 and 80% stronger than your hamstrings, all right? So that's where there's whenever you have a muscle imbalance, typically you're going to open yourself up for injury. So that's why it's really important to focus on the hamstring muscles and not just do exercises that are going to focus on the quads, okay? The next exercise that I'm going to demonstrate is a reaching row movement. We have a pulley machine here that we like to use for this exercise. If you don't have a pulley machine, which most of you will not have a pulley machine if you're training at home, it's okay. I'm going to show you another way you can go about doing this. But if you're at a gym, you want to use a pulley machine, you're going to set the pulley handles up where the pulleys are pulled from the ground, all right? So we've got some arms here that go up or down, and we're going to place the pulley at the lowest possible position, okay? Like the split stance RDL, I'm going to set my feet up in a split stance position again. And this is one of the better exercises, I think, for training the hamstrings to decelerate more efficiently. So I'm going to set my feet up in a split stance. Again, the trailing foot, if you notice, my heel is off the ground. And I've got my feet aligned with my hips. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach toward the fixation point or the fixed position of the cables in this, for this particular exercise. And then I'm going to pull. So I'm going to reach out as far as I can, flexing my spine, which is going to cause me to go into hip extension, and then stand up and pull. All right, so this is kind of a 2-for-1 exercise too, because this is also a pulley movement that's going to work your back musculature as well. But what's cool about this, the forces of this movement are coming in front of me. So I really have to, as the forces pull me forward, my hamstring is really focusing on decelerating my trunk flexing or my upper body bending forward. And that's what's so cool about this exercise, is that it's just like in real life. If you're running and sprinting and suddenly you have to stop, if you think about it, say I'm running, I'm sprinting, I have to stop suddenly to change direction. It's training your body to do exactly that. So that's why I like this particular exercise for training purposes and rehabilitation purposes and injury prevention. So let's say you don't have a pulley machine. You can take exercise tubing, which is really cheap. You can buy it just about anywhere. I'm using dual tubing, but you don't have to have dual tubing. You can have a single piece of tube. Place it around or tie off the handle to, I'm using a 75-pound dumbbell, but if you have a fixed piece of equipment or maybe a post in your basement, tie it off at the bottom of that, okay? Same idea here when I'm setting up, and this is even better because you get an idea of the angle of my upper body as I reach forward. I'm going to reach forward, reach out, and then stand up and pull. Again, same thing I was just doing with the Kaiser, on the Kaiser machine, but now I'm using exercise tubing. Again, very inexpensive. You can do anything with this stuff. It comes in different tension. If you want to make it harder, real easy. Move back. My weight's starting to slide a little bit. And that's what that looks like, okay? It's just a low pulley row, what I call a reaching row, split stance reaching row, either on a cable machine or with exercise tubing. Okay, the next exercise we're going to demonstrate is with this TRX machine. And this is called a suspension training system, and we just have it looped around our power rack here. These are relatively cheap to buy, but there are different types of suspension training systems. This is just one that we happen to use and we like. You can actually adjust the straps here depending on how far off you want the handles from the ground and how high up you have the suspension training system tied off. So since it's on our power rack, we have it adjusted for a lot of the exercises that we do here. So what I'm going to do on this exercise is I'm going to loop my feet through here. I will have to say, and I think a lot of our clients here at Body Symmetry could attest to this, that this is one of the most difficult series of exercises for your hamstrings that I know of. We're going to do 3 different movements. The first exercise is a straight leg hip extension. The second exercise is a leg curl, and the third exercise is a bent knee hip extension. All right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lie on my back. My feet, if you notice here, are through the stirrups. My feet are probably anywhere between 10 and 12 inches off the ground. I'm going to lie on my back, press my hands into the floor next to my hips. I'm going to straighten my knees, and I'm going to lift my hips towards the ceiling. Again, this is a hip extension movement. And I'll do maybe a series of, say, 10 repetitions. Then after my 10th rep, I'll lift my hips, and I'll go right into the leg curl, where I draw my heels into my butt. Okay, and then the third movement, and I do these all in succession, I don't rest between them, is the bent knee hip extension. So my toes, again, in the stirrups, knees flex slightly, and I'm going to lift my hips up towards the ceiling. I think that's about 10. I'm not the world's greatest counter. And I'll take my feet out of the stirrups. And maybe I'll have a client do that. Maybe I'll have them do 2-3 sets and rest 90 seconds between each set. I have some athletes that will do 60 consecutive reps on that particular exercise, which is a lot. But if you're able to do 60 consecutive reps on this particular exercise, you've got bulletproof hamstrings. So great exercise. If you don't have access to a TRX suspension training system, you can use a Swiss ball, and you can do what I call a Swiss ball triple threat. Very similar. It's actually similar in all the movements, except it's not as hard. So if you have a Swiss ball, same thing. Heels in the middle of the ball, push your hands into the floor. Same idea. Say 10 reps, lifting your hips up towards the ceiling. This is the straight leg hip extension. Second exercise, leg curl. The cool thing about the Swiss ball, it does challenge your balance a bit more. And then you've got the bent knee hip extension. I like to tell people to keep their heels slightly off the ball, pushing through their toes, which is going to make this a little bit more of a challenge for the hamstring. And really get those hips up. All right, that was 10. So, triple threat, either with the suspension training system or the Swiss ball. We've given you a lot of different exercises today for the hamstrings. Again, hamstrings both flex the knee and extend the hip. Make sure that you're doing exercises that focus on hip extension, not just knee flexion. This is knee flexion, this is hip extension. Most of the exercises that I demonstrate today focus a little bit more on the knee, or rather the hip extension. okay? That's because that's usually often underutilized exercise. We've got a couple of quick stretches I'm going to demonstrate. The first stretch here, again, flexibility, really important in the hamstring. It's what I call a standing windshield wiper. And I like to elevate my foot on a box or a stair, my opposite foot right under my hip, and I'll push my hips back, all right? Nice straight spine, and I'll take my foot and I'll windshield wiper like so, back and forth. I get a really big stretch here in my hamstrings, and I'll maybe tweak my upper body, reaching to my left, which is going to give me a different response in the hamstring. I maybe spend 45 seconds doing that. The next one is the standing Romanian deadlift. What I'll do is I'll put my hands on my knees or slightly out in front of me, and I'll just push my butt back, like so. Push my hips back until I feel a real big stretch here in my upper hamstrings. I may tweak this a little bit with one foot forward, a split stance, and do it this way, and I may tweak even further by reaching to my left or my right, which is going to change the demand here in the hamstring from the ground up. All right, 2 really good stretches. A lot of other stretches you can do for your hamstrings. Those are 2 basic ones that I want to give you today that maybe many of you have never seen before. Thanks again for joining me on another edition of Personal Health and Fitness. Until next time, I'm your host, Chad Marshak. Hey, Quinn and Riley.